Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast, where we illuminate subjects in the IT infrastructure space. Get ready to hear some amazing insights from outstanding individuals that will change the way you think about IT. And now, here's your host, Mark Teely.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Teely, and joining me today is Tony Grayson. Tony, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark. Happy to be here.
That was fantastic. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. I mean, you and I have had conversations for a while now about infrastructure and sustainability and edge computing, et cetera. So I'm excited about a chance to chat and share what I think would be some at least minimally educational tidbits, more so probably from you than me.
I think it's probably from you.
For anybody who happens to be listening in. So before I jump into the questions, what's going on in Tony's world?
Yeah, no, if you go back, I've had a really odd path to tech. I spent 20 plus years in the Navy, ended up commanding my own submarine, but was spent out a lot of time out at sea. Decided I wanted to kind of put family first. And then when I went to my first job, I kind of realized, a submarine has, 15, 16 megawatts of IT load. I kind of know how this cloud thing works. We just don't call it substrate. We don't call it dependencies. We don't, it's not the overlay full stack. It's just different terms. And so, everything I've done beyond that, from Facebook to AWS to Oracle has been kind of a more of a learning process in kind of how to translate that 20 years of Navy on the facility side and the IT side into how cloud work and what that works. And, I finally had a chance to kind of step back and look at what I want to do. And I kind of realized that, hey, I kind of want to try my hand at running a business and put all these good ideas and pontifications that I have and see if there's any merit to actually starting it up and see if they're actually needed. So that's kind of how I ended up and winded up here. Loved all the companies I worked at, learned a lot, wouldn't give that up for the world. But, I think it's time to actually try to start this kind of infrastructure business.
So I think this is fantastic, and I'm really excited to hear more over time about what you'll be working on and so on. And for the audience, two things that I want to bring up before we move into the themes. And one is when you're, and I've never been even on a submarine except for one of those that's a museum somewhere. So I don't know Dick as compared to my guest, but I can hypothesize with the best of them. And my hypothesis around working on a submarine is that you're in a steel tube most of the time underwater with a nuclear power plant. And generally speaking, trying to keep quiet from everyone else in the ocean who's trying to find you. What could go wrong? There is I can't think of a better place other than maybe working on a nuclear facility specifically, where process and risk management are more important than on a submarine. Yep. And even on a nuclear carrier, something could go wrong, but you're floating on the surface. You can jump out, jump off, get on a lifeboat, whatever, but you can't do that on a submarine. So it's not without obvious reason that so many from the submarine fleets end up working in data centers, because that operational perfection and process orientation is really helpful to critical environments. So, and not to blow more smoke up Tony's, but as a longtime family member of military folks, dad, a commander in the Navy, spent 21 years as a pilot, brother in the Army, two brothers in the Army, an uncle in the Marines, and family going back 150 years in the military. I just want to call out the fact that Tony is the winner of, or not winner is probably the wrong word, the earner of the Navy's Stockdale Award. And other than winning the Flying Cross, the Navy Cross, I can't think of a more prestigious award. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Tony?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. And it was, it's in, I guess, the 80s, they wanted to start recognizing, COs from around the Navy. And you could be a SEAL commander, you could be an aviator, you could be a SWO, but kind of that represented kind of what they wanted out of leadership in the Navy. And it's an interesting award because it's you're nominated by your peers, and you go through the selection process. But I was just, I had, probably my life dream come true. During my 4 years, I was command of a submarine. Got to, work with some of the best people around the world. And, at the end of it, my peers nominated me for the Stockton Award. And so I was selected along with I was the East Coast person. And I was selected with a West Coast aviator who ran another squadron. So it kind of culminated my Navy career to kind of, get that and that kind of recognition where, it's more about the team that I was very, very lucky in my CO2. I had a great crew. Enabled me to be successful, but I don't think, I would never have gotten that or been there without, their backing on it. So it was a great realization. It was more, is a saying for them as it was for me, an award for them as much as it was for me, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And I appreciate the way you approach that. And anyway, thank you for your service and amazing stuff. So folks, today, Tony and I wanted to talk about sustainability in the data center space and in the IT industry as a whole. And, it seems like watching, in fact, I tweeted about this the other day, Tony, I don't know if you saw it, but I tweeted that watching the news these days looks like a slow motion version of watching the movie Day After Tomorrow, right? Because every other story is some calamity occurring somewhere that is the first of its kind, or the first in 1,000 years, or the worst fire season ever, whatever the case may be. This is the issue of sustainability has probably or most certainly peaked this year, right? At least in the United States, and we're a little behind certainly our European brethren. Where do you see as kind of maybe missed opportunities or hesitance in the current market for a better, more aggressive approach towards sustainable computing?
Yeah, I think it's we're kind of behind because sustainability actually has two factors in it. There's a public opinion factor, and that's why you start seeing it over, but it's a business decision as well. So it's very easy to tout how sustainable a company is going to be, but you actually have to put the money behind it. And what I'm seeing is people are doing that, but they're kind of, they're trying to balance that business decision and the money they're spending with the public opinion aspect of it.
Right.
And I think companies need to do more. By that, I mean, hey, it's great I build a wind farm, or it's great I build a solar farm that offsets my usage or what I'm doing. But if I really want to make a difference, why don't I build that wind farm at 2x and I give back to the local grid? Because it's kind of interesting where, I think it's in the last 2 years, or read a recent report, we put 200 gigawatts of renewable power, but prices are still increasing. And that's just because we have this weird paradigm of, we're kind of solving our own problems, not really solving the kind of holistic world problems of using this renewable power. And I think that's where we need to make a difference. And it's great to put it in, but how do you move that power around to the companies or the places that need it? And then what I would love to see is, kind of companies getting together and figure out how holistically we're going to solve the problem instead of I'm going to solve it for my point instance.
Yeah. No, I like that that way of thinking. I mean, as a longtime data center person, for lack of a better description, I don't like to call myself an expert, but I'm always surprised when, even at the level of a data center, people don't look at the entire problem envelope or opportunity envelope as a system, right? Your financial organization is part of the system. Your corporate sustainability office is part of the system. What land you're using is part of the system. What paint you use on the roof of the building is part of the system. How wide the doors are part of the system. And we haven't even gotten to any of the crap that's theoretically exciting about building a data center, right? And so if we don't look more systemically at how adding to the grid or modifying the grid or providing the right incentives, or educating people more effectively, right? In better understanding what maybe a near-term spend might mean in a long-term offset, right? Or vice versa from a negative standpoint, then we're likely to continue to struggle with this longer than we need to, right?
Yep. I'm 100% agreement. You start to see it playing out in Europe right now, where you have countries getting out of coal, but they're having to source power from other countries who are using coal to offset everything that is lost. It is, it is a big kind of thing where we're all in it together, and we need to do a better job of working together and figuring out how to solve it holistically, and not for these kind of point cases. I kind of agree with more, but it also, it goes beyond the power. I think power is just the easiest one, because power allows countries to generate wealth, because it provides that industrial base, which allows you to employ jobs. So power is the best thing to go after first, but then there's still water usage, and Arizona is a great example of that. And there's still, how do I get these kind of rare materials that go into, let's just say, batteries, for instance. There's a whole kind of supply chain aspect to it too that we also have to look at. We can't just say, cover our eyes and say, well, I have this great energy storage technique, without understanding, how did I get that energy storage technique? Right. What did it take to get to it? And what's the environmental impact on it? And I think, we got to start accepting the fact that some of these do have harmful effects on the environment, even though they might be good terms for, kind of short-term energy storage, as an example.
Right. I just saw a number of articles, and I didn't look at the backing for the article. And you have to be very careful about what you read, obviously, right? Yeah. And but they talked about how blue hydrogen sounds a lot better on TV than it is in real life, and that the energy involved in getting to blue hydrogen offsets any of the benefit that you assumed you were getting from using it. To your point, our industry. Probably not that dissimilar from being in a sub, at least in this one small regard, is extremely reluctant to change. And this isn't a story that I'm the first to mention. I mean, we've been talking about the limited ability or the reluctance to change in this industry for more than 20 years. But I think I'd like to spend a couple of minutes, getting your thoughts on how we measure as leaders, even as leaders above you and I, but where in the roles that we would typically be in a company, how we measure folks that run and operate our infrastructure, our data centers, because the fact is that the vast majority of enterprises still, when they call Tony on the phone or they call Mark on the phone, they don't say, how innovative are you with reducing the airflow requirements for part of the server room? They say, have you kept the server room running, or why the fuck was it down?
Yep. No, I agree. And I think this is kind of, if I look at it, I think data center industry has been reluctant to dip their toe into this because there's, where's the profit from it? Right now, all the cloud providers are building as quickly as humanly possible. A data center company, if they do nothing, will still make good money, good margins on what they're building right now. So why add the extra complexity in of doing R&D to add new technology? And oh, by the way, might not know the impact of it. We might have this awesome, battery. It'll get rid of the generators, but it's only been operated in a test environment. You have no clue what it's going to operate like when it's out there actually, and so there's the risk versus reward. And so how do you balance that, where you take some of the risk, but the customers also have to accept some of the risks? It's, do you want the customer to tell you what to build, or you want to recommend stuff to the customer? And I think there's this tension here of, it's almost what comes first, the chicken or the egg, where you have a lot of the data center industry waiting for the customer to tell them what they want them to do. But you also have some of the customer that doesn't really know what they want to do,
right,
and they want some input from the data center company, but that requires an R&D budget and a bunch of other stuff. So I think we got to get past that kind of as an industry. Look, and say, where do we need to go? How do we need to do it? And kind of come together and start to try to build in some of these kind of sustainability pieces into the data center market, or we're just going to continue having, as I say, it's, build a box after a box. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to slow down the pace of innovation. Now, it could be, Europe, the Fit for 55 will force innovation, but I'm curious to see how that kind of plays out in terms of local regulation. And it might just be that, I think they're going after, billions and billions of post-COVID infrastructure. And a lot of that's tied to, kind of sustainability goals. Maybe that's enough to drive that innovation piece. But I do think we as an industry need to do better about getting ahead of this and maybe building something that maybe the customer does not want, or maybe the customer doesn't necessarily need, but it helps out the environment. And it will cost some kind of money, but I think that's something we have to be willing to accept.
Right. Well, and what's interesting, and this is a potentially multifold, and I'll try to keep it short. What's interesting is that a lot of the solutions I've looked at over the years, or even tried to convince others to consider adopting, have actually been solutions that would save them money. And the only real reason they didn't pursue it, well, it's a kind of a two-part reason. One goes back to that assumption that, well, if I do this, if I don't have 100% assuredness that this brings zero new risk to the environment, then I won't do it. Or two, and this is a problem in the DCIM space and has been since the aughts, right, is that this notion of looking at the data center as a system is a concept that doesn't exist in most enterprises. And because it doesn't exist, they might come to me and I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to buy this DCIM solution for the power draw at the rack level, but I don't give a shit about the air conditioning. I don't give a shit about the server BIOS. I don't give a crap about measuring the data center. Those aren't my jobs. Right. And so unless you can get someone who owns the metrics and the responsibilities for innovation improvement across all those areas, that kind of change is really hard. And then final thought on that is, and I think I really just want to highlight the point you made before about helping the customer understand what the potential opportunity is, and recognizing that they might accept something that surprises you if you explain to them effectively what it is you're offering. And a great example of this was, I was doing a DR project for Brocade. In fact, before they hired me as their global head of infrastructure, I was just doing some consulting. I decided to take some time off, but lasted a whole weekend. I went to the CFO during the process and I said, what are your availability requirements? And I went through a bunch of different systems. One of them just happened to be email. And he says, oh, it needs to be available 100% of the time. And I came prepared. I showed him what it would cost to have it available 100% of the time. And I showed him what it would cost to have it available 99.95% of the time. And it's like a fourfold difference in price, especially back then, right? It wasn't as easy to do redundancy in 2006 as it is now. And he said, you know what? I think 99.95 is just fine, Mark.
Exactly. But I think, what will drive a lot of this is if we come together as an industry and figure out a new way to, look at the efficiency of a data center. PUE is, I know we talk about PUE and everyone talks about it, but it's just one subset. And to be honest, you could probably make PUE anything you want if you measure it a certain way or anything else. I mean, what about all your transmission loss from the substation? Do we look at any of that kind of stuff? I know we're looking at water usage now, but there's more to it than that. I think we need to kind of come together and, get to a whiteboard and try to, lock ourselves in a room and figure out power, supply chain, water usage, and kind of what is this ultimate efficiency we're trying to get, and call it some kind of new kind of number. And I don't know what that would be or how we do it, but there's definitely a lot of smart people in this industry. But I do think we need to characterize how we're doing it, our impact in the environment, and how we're building, and kind of come up with some kind of new number on that. And I know some people have looked at it and everything, but I think it needs to come from the industry instead of outside in, and not something that needs to be, where you pay for some kind of certification. It just needs to be, hey, this is the engineering facts. This is how we're designed. This is how we do it.
Right.
And this is kind of where we sit, where data center sits on the scale. And we understand, hey, you're in Arizona, you're going to be using something, your power might go up a little bit more, or you're in the Arctic, that's going to be something different. We can't just broad stroke data centers. There are different environments that we're in, which require specific engineering decisions that we make. And I think, whatever this tool or kind of percentage or number that we come up with should take that into effect too.
Right. No, totally agree. I gotta this. I love this topic, obviously, and so we're almost at a half an hour, and we haven't even touched on the topic that everybody believes I have to talk about because it's practically who I am these days, which is edge. But one last thought before we go to the topic of edge and sustainability is that back when I was directly involved in the data center industry, as opposed to supporting it the way I am now, I actually tried to come up with a measure, not as complete as what you just suggested, but it was around the idea of efficient use of the actual facility, right? And the hard part that I came to was the other half. Actually, all of it was hard, trying to do it myself. I'm just not that smart. But the part that I really struggled with was how to actually weigh, and this is the point that I think you were just making, how to weigh everything about the facility, not just the power draw, but and this is a stupid point, but did they use lead-based paint? Do they have a black parking lot cover? Do they use more steel than they have to? Did they use a renewable material for building the walls? Did they do a recovered building, or was it a net new building? And all of those things factor into the total impact, to your point. So,
Yeah.
and moving on to edge and sustainability. Obviously, Tony, you've heard enough of my BS around what I think the edge is going to be and how big it's likely to be, and it seems like you're mostly drinking the same Kool-Aid I am. Understanding what we believe is likely to happen. It seems like an obvious statement that sustainability is more important than ever because of the potential. I mean, just the idea that we could duplicate, let alone quadruple or 10x the current cloud environment at the edge. It staggers the mind to think what that means in the way of footprint and impact, et cetera. So, what are some of your thoughts around challenging the assumptions? And you sort of touched on those in one of your previous answers about challenging the assumptions that customers have as an example, but around edge, what are some of your thoughts around challenging the assumptions for better sustainable?
I think, kind of edge is harder because, it's easier to build efficient data centers because they're large and they're at scale. Yep. So how do you do that for something small? But I would agree with you on the point. This could be right next door. This could be right next to your kid's school. These are going to be all over. And so these aren't going to be like in some high desert, in Mesa or, in Idaho or, Pineville, kind of. Yeah, exactly. They're not going to be, these are going to be right next door. So I think, the environmental impact and thinking about that and how they're powered and kind of the impacting environment are going to be a lot, kind of bigger. They might just be smaller use cases, but you're going to have thousands. If we're doing this right, we're going to have 10,000s of these all over. And so how do we figure that in? How do we do it where you don't necessarily need the big overhead to make it cost effective? Maybe it is, kind of a smaller version of, a wind farm there. Maybe it's just one, or maybe it's a smaller version of solar that you kind of offsetting that kind of stuff. But I do think we need to take a look at that and think about how we can be efficient on some of these use cases that we're doing it at right now, but at a much, much smaller scale. And I think that's hard because it's people right now, they're building these massive wind farms to offset stuff. Well, how do you still find that cost efficiency in something that's smaller? And maybe there's no cost efficiency and we just commit to saying this edge data center is going to be more expensive than, kind of hyperscale data centers or 10, 20 meg data centers because we have to put the sustainability in there. It's not as efficient on cost, and we have to do it. It's not, it's not a if should we. It's we have to do it. I think.
Right. And so, because I agree that the sustainability has to apply, and so we have the proverbial head and brick wall problem, right? And that head and brick wall problem in this particular space is I see opportunity, but I can't solve for that opportunity if my costs are too high. I see opportunity, but I can't solve for that opportunity. I keep going back and forth with that, right? And that's one of the reasons why, in my mind, edge isn't more of a dominant infrastructure strategy today than it could be, because of the very problem that you're addressing or you're mentioning, and that's this barrier to entry of assumption of premium landscape, right? So, do you see an opportunity to stretch the imagination around what a data center can be or what a server can be, et cetera, so that we can get I'm going to back up just a second. I did some back of the napkin calculations just for fun that I did in a blog a few months ago about the potential footprint if edge is only 5 times greater than public cloud versus 100 times, like Michael Dell suggests, and it's staggering, right? It's like 40 million new racks or something or 400 million new racks. I don't remember, in 810 million square feet of data center space. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I do remember it's 810 million square feet of data center space at medium density, which is 1,620 million square feet at current density for most enterprise data centers, or 1.6 billion, excuse me. And so to me, this is sort of there's oil in the shale. There's too much of it to ignore. So even though we don't have the tech right now, there's too much to ignore. So how do we close that gap, right? There is too much opportunity at the edge for us to assume that it has to wait for somebody to simplify it, or for the opportunities to be so valuable that they can support any cost, right? So what do you see as some of the areas where we should challenge those assumptions so that we can lower that barrier to entry and still hit the sustainability and space and stuff that we're hoping for?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the challenge that I think the edge has is people want hyperscale at the edge, and they want that hyperscale pricing. They know I'm used to getting, let's say, and this is just examples, let's just say I'm getting $60 per kilowatt, which I don't, in Ashburn, which I'm not saying everyone can provide that or anything like that, but that's the price you want on the edge. But you're not going to get that because it's a different scale, it's a different real estate structure. It could be, right downtown Paris, and very valuable real estate. So I think we have to accept that we aren't going to have that same kilowatt pricing that we have, and we aren't going to have the scale kind of cost, which drives down a lot of that pricing. So I think it's, even though we want as low as cost as possible, that shouldn't be at the expense of sustainability, security, and everything else. So I think, what we're doing for edge, yes, it will cost a little bit more, but eventually we'll get these prices down. But we can't assume that the edge is going to be an exact copy of what hyperscale is going to be. Am I really going to put, I think this was a post on LinkedIn, am I really going to put $10 million worth of kit in something that's downtown that anyone can cut a lock off and take all that stuff out? No, you're going to want some kind of physical security on that. That's going to add an extra cost because it's in small scale. So so what is that right balance? I think we're figuring that kind of stuff out. And until we do that, I think there will be barriers to the edge on this kind of stuff. But we just kind of got to accept that it's going to be higher cost now and just start looking for the use cases and figuring out how to do it. On how we do that. But eventually, as we keep on doing this stuff, we'll find out better ways to do it as we continue, just like we have with the hyperscale data centers. So it was a long-winded way. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Mark,
no, I mean, I don't know that there is a perfect answer. And, I mean, I asked the question because of, I have some beliefs and expectations. I try to measure my thoughts and hypotheses based on, historical precedents, et cetera. And I look at it and I think your approach is extremely logical. I mean, the idea that, edge will only grow as fast as supportable opportunities occur. And then as more opportunities occur, and people figure out how to reduce the price barriers, then more opportunities will occur. Obviously, if somebody figures out how to do cheaper earlier, then that just accelerates the market.
Yeah. And I think, kind of the other barrier is, people are struggling with, how do I deploy, let's just say 2,000 of these where I don't have to hire 20,000 people to manage it.
Right.
I think what's missing is this software overlay, because it's not typically been our business. When was the last time I designed a data center on a DCIM BMS system? But I think the edge, you need to do that, because that's how you're going to man and operate a lot of these things and kind of have this capability and bring that, kind of flexibility and scale.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy for me to build a 100 megawatt data center and have a shift to 2. Now, how do I manage, 1,000, 1 megawatt data centers without, hiring 10 people for each of that? I think that's where, to be honest, I think that's where the edge is struggling right now on that. It's this scale piece. How do you do that? Because we don't have a lot of these BMS DCIMs that kind of have that overarching capability and control on. But hey, guess what? I've been doing this stuff since the 90s in submarines, where you have a very small shift on a reactor and you build that kind of DCIM BMS where you can operate that, kind of remotely. And that's the same kind of thinking that I think we need to bring to the edge.
Yeah. No, I would totally agree. I see, a number of players attempting parts of this, but I think as a model, I would compare it from an opportunity standpoint to what the industry has struggled with over the last year to accommodate people that need to work from anywhere in jobs that are normally in the office, right? So how do we solve for that assumption that there needs to be somebody tweaking the fan belt, or somebody adjusting the power draw of a rack? How do we get past those assumptions and come up with models that support, hands-free 99.95% of the time?
Yeah, and I think it's, if a rack or a power supply goes down, does that really affect your business?
Right.
And if it does, maybe you double it up, or but maybe we don't need a generator there. Maybe we don't need N+1. Maybe we just need N. I think we can't just say, I'm going to shrink a hyperscale data center down with all that kind of, efficiencies that you have, and put that at the edge, because the market won't bear it, I don't think.
Right.
I think we need to have a new kind of baseline of what do we want, and what are we really trying to solve for? If I have 1,000 of these across a metro and I have one go down, does that really matter?
Right.
I don't know. And I think it probably depends on the application, but I think you're talking a very, very different mindset, which is, if a 100 megawatt data center goes down, that's a problem. But if one of your 100 go down, is that really a problem? I don't know. And maybe it shouldn't be. And I think we got to kind of look at that and how we operate that, and, kind of start with there, and build the applications for it. I think it's a completely different way of thinking that just the industry hasn't wrapped their hands around it yet.
Right. And I agree with that as well. And would say that, one of the hardest parts of someone attempting to build for the edge is that everyone wants to build for the edge that they want to support.
Yep.
And unfortunately, for me, for instance, if you and I had been having this conversation, say 4 years ago, I would have said everything at the edge is going to be functions as a service or containers, and everything will be designed on fail fast and recover elsewhere, recover fast or fail in place, leave it there, that kind of thing. But the reality is not so clean.
Yep.
Right. And there are people putting VMs in what would be considered distributed infrastructure instead of what might be more like distributed cloud, like you're sort of suggesting, right? And so the ability, and this is not anything that either or you or I necessarily need to answer, but it is a problem for the space, and that's that there are customers who we can build for who could fail from one place to another without any issue, and they'd be happy to do that, especially if it saved them another $5 a kilowatt hour per month. But on the other hand, there'll be others who, because of data compliance or because of the way their applications are designed, they're going to need the same level of security and redundancy that they would experience in a traditional colo in almost every location.
Yep.
And so those two opportunities are very different and support very different, business models and data center strategies.
And I think we should not assume we know what the customer wants. And by that, I mean, we always want the best, we always want the quickest, we always want the fastest. But if I shut my computer screen down, it goes to sleep. I'm willing to accept that 10 or 15 seconds that it takes to boot up, to kind of get it back as a save energy, but it also saves on kind of the cost of the computer and the memory versus SSD and versus hard drive, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, if you were probably to ask me, will a customer, does he want, kind of the computer when you open it up immediately comes back up? I would say, yeah, because that's the best. But we seem to be okay with customer, kind of computers going to sleep in that slow boot up time is restored, because it's a trade-off. And I think we need to look at the edge in something similar. What are customers okay with? What is an absolute that you have to have, that all your stuff was saved, that it comes up, but maybe the time is, kind of the variable that customers are willing to accept that kind of extra time, just because we don't need that kind of, memory on board computer. So that was kind of an abstract way of looking at it. It was more to the point of, kind of, I just think we don't know really what the customers want. We should stop assuming we do, and actually get out there. And it might be 50 million use cases. Might be IoT wants one thing, maybe the film industry wants one thing, maybe HPC automotive want one thing, and you build something that's flexible enough to care about it. You shouldn't really care. Maybe it's a module that you have, cooling goes in here. It's, a total modular concept. We don't have to redesign from the ground up kind of thing.
Right. No, I think that's a critical component. And for everybody listening, if it sounds like Tony and I are being duplicitous or hypocritical, or maybe duplicitous is the better word, what the difference between what you and I talked about earlier relative to changing customers' opinions isn't so much a requirement for them to change how they write their applications, but rather what is a successful environment, almost regardless of the application, versus some applications just plain won't work if they don't have the minimum criteria that we're talking about relative to a particular edge location or set of locations. So Tony, I know we could go on for another hour easily, and maybe we should do that at a future date. But before we wrap up, any thought-provoking last words?
Kind of taking a step back, I think we, the industry, are assuming that what the golden road that is there right now, which is the cloud service providers we can't even build enough. Things are selling before ground is even broken. Is that going to happen in perpetuity? I don't think it is. And I think you're going to have these data center companies are going to have something that makes them different at the end, whether it's sustainability, whether it's kind of network, whether it's, something, but we kind of have to get our head out of the sand on this kind of stuff and focus, instead of 1 year, where do we want to be 3 to 4 to 5 years down the road? Because that's the stuff we need to be working on right now.
Right.
And it might be immersion cooling, it might be liquid cooling. I don't know what the right answer is, but we really need to, kind of stop looking at our feet and kind of look, 2 to 3 to 4 years, because, or if we don't do that, then the government will do it for us. And then we'll be put into a regulation, kind of, or permitting, or you kind of name it kind of thing. But we have a chance to really make a difference. And I think we need to, have the strength of character and, kind of the wherewithal to kind of take that first step forward and kind of push the industry, because we know power, we know kind of supply, we know kind of real estate, we know kind of construction. We can actually really make a huge influence on the industry, not only but how data centers were built, but how maybe homes are built or how power distribution is done. And, so let's start doing more than just kind of building data centers. Let's really actually make a change and try to do a little bit more.
That sounds good. And Tony, again, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been fabulous to catch up with you. For the audience, if they want to follow you, where can they find you? LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever?
I think, Twitter, I've tried it. I'm not necessarily the best at it. I will start trying to do more on there, but I think LinkedIn is probably my go-to medium. And you'll start to see more articles that I'm starting to write. I did one about human error. There's another one that's coming out, sustainability, and it kind of goes into the power discussion that we talked about further. But you can follow me on LinkedIn, which you usually get the most of them.
Cool. And for those of you who are interested in following Tony on LinkedIn, and I would recommend that you do, Tony has a great habit of asking some tough questions and looking for responses and creating conversation. And I think that is probably the single best thing about the LinkedIn platform, because it's a conversation that can continue and be easily followed versus trying to do that on Twitter, which I use both, but LinkedIn is much better for that kind of thing. So yeah, Tony, again, thank you very much for being on the show. For all my listeners and watchers, thank you very much. And feel free to reach out if you have somebody you'd like to recommend for the podcast. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Edgevana Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. To learn more, visit www.edgevana.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us on our next episode.